All right, welcome everyone. My name is Melissa. I am from Probably at the Library. I have a blog where I cover a lot of Jane Austen fan fiction. And as you know, if you've been here before, I love to interview authors and get to know a little bit about them, their story, why they're writing, and just have a little bit of fun chatting. So today I have Shannon Winslow, who has one of my absolute favorite fan fictions, Murder at Northanger Abbey, which I just adore that book, and hopefully we'll be able to talk a little bit about your inspiration for writing that. You have many other books under your belt now, a lot of Elizabeth and Darcy stories that we all love. And I would like to start off, maybe let's talk about when Mr. Darcy jumped into your cart at Costco. Tell us how your love of Jane Austen came to be.
Yeah, that you meet a lot of interesting people at Costco, and I always say I met Jane Austen at Costco because until that point, which was probably 15 years ago now, I'd never read a word of Jane Austen. I don't know what my teachers in high school and college were thinking, but I was never assigned to read any, and I'm not sure I would have enjoyed her even at that stage, so maybe it's okay. But I was in Costco one day and cruising through the movie section, and I saw Colin Firth's pretty face, and I think that that's probably what caught my eye. And and I hadn't even been a fan of period dramas or anything. So what made me buy that, I don't know, but that was a fateful moment and literally changed my life because I watched the movie and, of course, adored it, and then wanted more and was looking for. I had to read the book, and then I read all the books, and then I watched all the movies, and then I was looking for more books, and there weren't any. And and then suddenly I finally came across a sequel to Pride and Prejudice, which I was thrilled to find. By the way, I didn't know there was a whole cottage industry out there writing Jane Austen fan fiction. I had no clue. And so I read this sequel, but I didn't like it. It wasn't at all. If I ever meet the author, I will thank her for inspiring me because it wasn't at all what my vision of what a sequel to Pride and Prejudice would be. Mm-hmm. And so I was all full of Crusaders fire, and I was going to sit down and write my own version, just really for my own amusement to see if I could do it and get my vision down on paper or on the computer screen, as the case may be. And I just took to it like a duck to water. I just love the writing process and discovered I was sort of good at it. So.
It's okay to say that. You're very good at it.
Thank you. So I never looked back after that. Thank you to Costco.
Here's the thing. You could just pinpoint the exact moment when your experience with Austen happened. And it truly, when you say changed your life, it's such a huge career change out of it that did you write anything before this, or was this your first attempt at writing?
This was seriously my first attempt at writing. And that's what became The Darcys of Pemberley, my first and still most popular novel. And of course, after many revisions and edits, et cetera. But I don't know what possessed me. I've done other creative things, but I never aspired to be a writer. I was a voracious reader, especially as a kid, and sort of gave it up while I was raising my own kids. Yeah. and then took it up again once they were kind of grown and on their own, and I had some free time to myself. And see, the other thing, the reason that title at Costco caught my eye was I'd already been thinking about, I really ought to read some of the classics, And so I'd, of course, heard the title Pride and Prejudice before, but I'd never read it. So when that title, as well as Colin Firth's pretty face, that title, I thought, okay, well, that's something that interests me. So where was I going with that? I don't remember.
Very fun. I asked you, we talked about Mr. Darcy jumping into your cart, and so you
but Costco, so. I think we'd moved beyond that, and I kind of circled around back to that. But anyway, I was always read, but I never aspired to be a writer like some people say. Oh, I've always known. Well, I had no idea.
I find it. I know it's a little bit controversial, but I have a lot of people ask me that haven't read Austen before, like, oh, what should I read first? How should I get into it? The reading some of those now, if you're not used to reading the classics, can be really tricky to get into. And I always recommend watching the movie so you have a frame of reference of what the story is going to be. And then when you go back and you are reading it, it makes sense as you're trying to get through some of the very different sentence structure than we have nowadays. And it helps to like make the flow make sense. So it must be for you.
I think that's perfectly legitimate to, I hope people will go on and read the books because, they're absolutely wonderful and you don't want to miss that. But I think it is helpful to people, like, as you put it, to have a frame of reference and to basically, and understand some of the subtleties perhaps about manners and what's appropriate and what's not. Otherwise, you have no idea why it's a big deal that Mr. Collins introduced himself.
That was literally the scene I was thinking of. Yes. And there is so much. I've even talked to other fan fiction writers that you're always studying history and learning new facts and new intricacies about the story that unravels some new layer. And then you go back and you read it again and you see things in a whole new light. And like this gift that keeps on giving because Austen never gets old because you're always discovering some new layers to the story. I was kind of similar. I did not stumble into the world of fan fiction, Jane Austen fan fiction, until the beginning of the pandemic. I had no clue. Like, I had read Austen and had watched all the movies and got into Bookstagram, Instagram, all that sort of stuff, and then somehow stumbled on one day and was like, oh my goodness, how did I not know that this existed? And now it makes up probably easily 50% of the reading I do is now fan fiction. There's this, I feel like these last few years have especially been so good with so many amazing stories being released.
Yeah, there's so much. You can't keep up with it. Well, and I don't even try. I really don't read much Jane Austen fan fiction myself. I don't want to be influenced by other people's work, for one thing. And but I'm really kind of glad I didn't know all that was out there when I started writing myself. Otherwise, I may never have written my own stories, because with all that out there, I would have found somebody that I enjoyed reading, and I might have been satisfied at that instead of feeling like I had to write the true story.
It was meant to happen for a
reason. Yes. Well, the only thing I kind of regret is I had no idea until after The Darcys of Pemberley was published that everyone in the fan fiction world had decided that Colonel Fitzwilliam's name was Richard. And I unfortunately gave him the name John in my book. Of course, Jane Austen doesn't tell us, but it's so firm in everyone's mind that his name is Richard that I've had people criticize me for being wrong about calling him John. So if I'd only known, I would have called him Richard like everybody else, and everybody would have been happy.
It's funny how some of the things become part of canon. Like the Bennet's names are never addressed in Pride and Prejudice, but you can't help but think of Thomas and Fanny are the names that are just always used for them so frequently too. And then when you don't see them as that and people do other, then it's like, oh, that doesn't, I don't know if that feels right, and you kind of have to readjust.
Well, actually, in my new book, Fitzwilliam Darcy in his own words, I put a little line in there just for those people who think Colonel Fitzwilliam's name is Richard. When the first time I think it's the first time in the book that he comes up, I say, Colonel Fitzwilliam, whose first name is Richard, but in a family replete with other men of the same appellation, he goes by his middle name, which is John. So I covered myself.
I remember that line. I remember it.
10 books in, I finally covered myself.
I'm sure your readers are more than happy to forgive you for that egregious sin that you committed early on.
I hope so.
Reading your books. So you talked a little bit about taking a break from reading while you had your kids. That's something I'm very familiar with. I kind of did the same. Like you do the college reading, and then you know take on adult responsibilities, and you can forget how much you enjoyed reading, and then you sort of come back around to it later on in life and adapt an old habit, I guess, sort of. So when you were a child reading, what books did you gravitate towards?
Well, I remember we always, neither of my parents were great readers themselves, but they always encouraged us to read. And I remember we always get these, was it the Weekly Reader or something? You're too young maybe, but you know, they pass them out at school and then you bring your order back with your little nickels and dimes and dollars and for your order. And so we were always able to order books. So we were always encouraged to do that. But the first books I really remember just being in love with, I was like many girls, I went through my horse crazy stage. And so I was just in love with horse books, and particularly the Black Stallion books, and, you know, Black Stallion and Son of Black Stallion. And consequently, I thought of writing, you know, Darcy and Son of Darcy. And I haven't got around to that one yet. But then I think I moved on to Nancy Drew and then Mary Stewart. And, you know, and basically I came out feeling like if there wasn't a romance in it, I wasn't interested. But anyway, I read a lot, and yes, and then I had to give it up kind of when I was raising kids, not because I lost interest in it. It was just because I had no time and no energy with, you know, raising kids and working and trying to keep ahead of things. So
yeah. We talked a little bit the other day about enjoying reading for the kind of escapism, and I feel, you know, that's so true with romance. I was thinking the other day, like, how do I not get tired of reading romance? Because that's primarily what I read, is historical romance. But I think there's just so many interesting ways to retell stories, and obviously fan fiction shows us that that's definitely true, because we have these same characters reimagined in so many different ways. But for some reason, we don't ever seem to tire of. I do like just kind of mix it up a little bit and not read back to back to back Elizabeth and Darcy, but it's still, when you come back to it, it feels fresh again in so many ways. Do you find it difficult to think of new stories to write, or they just kind of, these situations come to you and you let your creativity take off with it?
Well, so far I haven't run out of ideas, which is good. I take a little different approach than a lot of Jane Austen fan fiction writers do, in that so far, at least, I have not written any variations where I've changed events in the original story. I kind of don't want to go there in a way. In my mind, it's like, oh, there's one true story. And I love adding on to it. When I first started writing and was, you know, in a group blog, writing missing scenes for blog posts was just lovely. I just find one little snippet. Oh, Jane Austen didn't really explain that completely, or she tells us it happened, but she didn't elaborate. And so then I can write that scene. And I just really enjoyed that. And so I've added on to the Pride and Prejudice story, but only things that agree with and fit with the original. And so how many books? I think I've got 5 Pride and Prejudice books. Anyway, they all agree with canon. They all agree with each other. So it's kind of a world building approach. And then I love all 6 of Jane Austen's novels. So one of my personal goals is to write at least one book that's related to each of her 6. And so, you know, there again, that expands the scope of my ideas. And so I've only got Emma and Sense and Sensibility to go, because I kind of got the others covered, I figured.
Did I see you working on Sense and Sensibility for your next book, or am I making that up?
Well, no, you're not making that up. That's what I intend. I haven't really had a chance to get going on it yet in a very big way. But yeah, that's the next one up, partly because that's the theme book of the Jane Austen Society of North America AGM next year.
Yes.
And which I hope I get to attend, because that's up in British Columbia, not too far from me. And so I thought that would be good timing if I had a book about Sense and Sensibility by then.
Yeah.
We'll see if it happens.
Yeah, I love the movie, the story. Like, that is one of my favorite. Persuasion is my absolute favorite, which I feel like it's one of the stories that people kind of come around to later in life. Like, I've heard a lot of people say, I read it when I was younger and I didn't take to it, and then you really sort of get her later on as you get older, and the lost love sort of story. But
yeah.
I don't know if this is controversial to say, but Emma Thompson, her adaptation is just so beautiful. Even the music, I listen to that soundtrack at least once a week.
Yeah.
So relaxing.
Yeah, well, of course, that was really the only Sense and Sensibility we had for a while.
Yes.
Really high quality anyway. So yeah, I'm pretty devoted to that one myself. Although I do love the newer one too. It's equally good. So, but you switched from Persuasion back to Sense and Sensibility there.
Yeah, sorry. No, I was just thinking of movie adaptations, and I was thinking, my thought was going controversial is what made me think, everyone has their favorite of movies, but I really think any Austen is good Austen. If it gets people interested in it, there really is no right or wrong or which one is best. Or
yeah, I kind of feel the same way. Whatever introduces people to Jane Austen is a good thing in general. And absolutely. Yeah, hopefully they, and then they move on from there and they discover the books and all that. So
yeah. So you have a quote that I wanted to talk about, and you kind of covered a little bit about your writing process, which I find interesting to know now that it makes complete sense. I guess I should have realized from reading your books that you always branch off of the story and don't make any changes to actual, which I loved. Fitzwilliam, in his own words, I thought it was a very fresh and interesting take on it, and I enjoyed that one a lot.
Is this an appropriate time to show the book cover then?
Absolutely. I have it on my Kindle, so I don't always have the pretty covers to show. And now I know you're also an artist. Did you paint that cover, or have you done any of your own covers?
Yeah, that's kind of where I started because my mom was an artist, and so my creative juices kind of flowed in that direction first until I started writing, and then that sort of took over. But I have done some artwork in the past, and so when it comes time to do a cover, that's where art and literature come together, and so it's a wonderful chance to drag out my paintbrushes or pastels and do a little artwork. It's kind of I don't trust my abilities in the art field as much as I do my abilities in writing. So anyway, yeah, I've done artwork for most of the covers in some respect, I guess. Let's see. Well, my two Leap books, there's no art that I've done for those, and my Persuasion book. Have you read that yet?
I have not. I still have to catch up on some of your books that my Kindle keeps saying, you want to read this, you want to read this. I'm like, I do. I'm going to get to it. I promise.
Anyway, I think that's one of, in some ways, I'm most proud of this book. And since your favorite, that should be next on your list, maybe, of my books when you get to it.
I will make sure.
But yeah, there's only one tiny little art thing on the back. That's my art. I didn't do the cover. I work with my nephew who's a graphic designer, and he does all the graphic arts for the covers.
I do love the cover of that. Yeah, I'll grab it here.
Yeah, I saw that one in the background.
Yeah, I discovered you with this. I don't know. I think it popped up on a blog post or something that I saw, and I immediately was like, I have to read this book. I ordered it right away. And then I read, I think, your last two. I've caught now, so I have a few to catch up on.
Yeah, well, you probably have a few, but well, especially since you came to this area pretty recently, you have a lot of things to catch up on.
It's really hard to balance. Like, there's so many new ones coming out, and then people recommending older books that, you need to read this, and I have to really whittle it down and try to pick the ones that I think I'm gonna love and
Yeah.
stick with that, because it can be very overwhelming.
Yeah. Well, on Murder at Northanger Abbey, there, that was, you asked about the cover art, and that was a collaborative effort, actually. I mentioned that my mom was an artist, and she, well, I have it here. This is, she's not well. She's still living, but she's not well. So she's not doing any more art at this point. She's 89. But she was produced a lot of artwork over her lifetime, and some of them, some things, just piles and piles of what she would have called starts, where she splashed some paint on some canvas or on some paper, and then meant to develop it later and maybe never got around to it. So that's how that cover started, was with a start of hers. I don't know if I can show it here, but there.
Oh, wow.
All that gorgeous color.
Yeah. Oh, beautiful.
Made it look kind of like a dramatic sky with fire and that sort of thing. And so that's where that cover started. And then I did a pen and ink drawing that went over the top of it. So combined effort. I thought that was kind of fun to bring my mom into the process.
Absolutely. What a special story behind the cover, that it has a meaning to you, and you and your mom were able to do it. And it perfectly fits the mood of the story.
Yeah, it's got to have that gothic, spooky feel to it.
If anything says gothic and it's tied to Austen, I am going to read it 100%. I will be buying that book.
That's my only gothic one. My only mystery, at least so far. I've toyed with the idea of doing a Sense and Sensibility mystery. Maybe later on. I don't think that's going to be the next book, though.
So who are your favorite Austen characters that you really want to play with the most?
Oh boy, that's a tough question, because I love all of them, and as it's really fun to get to know the ones you don't know as well, or the ones you think you know. But then when I start writing a story, it's like, it's not so much making up stuff. I feel like I'm discovering what's going on and discovering who they are and what they were up to, more than I'm making it up. Like Georgiana, we know very little about Georgiana from Austen herself, but as I wrote her, her story in Georgiana Darcy of Pemberley, and that was after writing the Darcys of Pemberley. So it was finding out what she was up to all the time she was off screen in my first book, and saying, well, wait a minute, where is she now? What's she up to, and what's going on, and developing her story. And the same with Fitzwilliam Darcy, in his own words. He's missing from the page a lot in Pride and Prejudice. So what's happening all that time? Where is he? What's he up to? And it feels like discovering what he's up to rather than making it up. So it's getting to know those characters that you think you already know, as well as developing some of the minor characters that we're not told much about.
Do you have anyone you would not, like, your least favorite Austen character that you would want to tackle? Or are you up for giving a story to anybody?
Well, I wouldn't want, not that there's any really, really horrible villains in Jane Austen, but I wouldn't want to spend too much time in the head of a really nasty character, because I don't want to spend that much time in the dark. I'd rather spend it in the light and writing things that are light and not dark. Well, we had just had a discussion on Facebook about Austen versus the Brontes, basically, and the Bronte sisters were very talented writers, and I can appreciate their stories as literature, but I don't really want to spend that much time poking around in the minds of psychopaths and killers. That goes back to my quote that you were aware of.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that's like the perfect full circle wrap up, is the idea that Austen you see Austen as an author that brings you happiness, finding her, writing her stories, bringing the characters to life. And you have on your about section here on your blog, it says, "Let other pens dwell on guilt and misery. I quit such odious subjects as soon as I can, impatient to restore everybody not greatly in fault themselves to tolerable comfort, and to have done with all the rest." So you really want to bring joy to your readers.
Well, I hope so. Yeah, and it's a bit of escapism. It's a bit of fairy tale, and but yeah, I want it to be uplifting, not something that they are, miserable and despondent after they finish. I can remember reading stories, books, and when I was in high school, maybe, where I felt depressed after reading them, and that's not what I want. There's enough depressing, unhappy things you can read about in the news for entertainment. Let's keep it light and uplifting, and for me as well as for the reader, hopefully.
I'm looking forward to many, many stories. I feel like you took off running. I'm so amazed that you never wrote before you started these, and just really fast. I mean, it was like your passion was just waiting there for you to discover it.
Yeah.
And for it to take off.
Yeah, I'm just really grateful to have something, new and exciting to do at this stage of my life when, I quit my day job and my kids are grown, and so it's wonderful to have something, keep my mind stimulated, and a whole second career that I had not anticipated at all.
And you still get to pull out the paintbrush on occasion.
Absolutely. Pick up the paintbrush once in a while.
Thank you so much, Shannon. It was a pleasure to talk to you and get to know you and a little bit more about your stories and your writing process.
No, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity, and fun getting to know you too.
Thank you to everyone that watched and joined in today, or if you're watching this later, thank you so much. I will include a link to Shannon's blog, her books down below, so you can check out some of her stories if you're interested. I, again, highly recommend Murder at Northanger Abbey. Absolutely one of my favorites, and all of the rest of her books. I'm going to get through that backlist, I promise you.
Well, at least the persuasion book, at least.
Yes, I will get to persuade. I will make that a 2021 goal.
Okay.
That I will read that. So thank you, everyone, and we will see you later. Thank you, Shannon.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.